Put your hands together for our first speaker, Henrique. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to be here, Sr. Ministro, Mr. Commissioner, Professor Furtado, Catarina, everybody. Especially my applause and congratulations to all the organizers. It is really impressive to come here and to see this. So well done, and I hope the rest of the session continues okay. It was truly a privilege for me to be here. It's an honor. But it is also a challenge. I mean, as you could see from the presentation, I know nothing about agriculture, so this is the risky part of it. But on the other hand, I'm an historian of science, and if an historian of science can claim any authority, is that he has been studying innovation for all of his life, and that's what I've been doing for 30 years. Because when you look at the past of history, basically what we do is to look how innovation proceeded with time. So this is my deal, what I propose to do here, and this is what was a challenge that I was faced with, to look at the past and try to see if by the inspection of some events in the past we could draw some ideas on how to proceed into the future. This is a risky topic. I mean, you cannot repeat history, but you definitely can learn something with history. So instead of doing a very abstract presentation, and since I only have 10 to 15 minutes, I decided to take one example. So I will produce one example. And I went, very, very parochial. So I decided to do an example from Portuguese history. I mean, you took the trouble of coming to Portugal, so let me show you something interesting in the history of Portugal with deep reflexes and deep connection to the ideas of innovation. So this is what I'm going to do. So everybody knows that for centuries, really, roughly for about 2,000 years, Europeans, and I will only speak about the European scenario because in other regions of the world this story was a little bit different. Europeans sailed, so they had navigational knowledge, sailed in the Mediterranean and along many coasts and rivers in Europe. Everybody knows about this. So this was the acquired experience for many, many centuries. If you look carefully at the type of sailing techniques and knowledge, you will see that these are what it is technically known as short-range, point-to-point navigation. You go to a place and you go to another place, and they are never very far away. I mean, there you have the voyages of Odysseus, which is truly surprising. And if you have to go from Troy to Ithaca and you take 10 years, I mean, there's some problem here. But anyway, so this was a type of things that Europeans knew how to do very well, and they did it for centuries. Now, suddenly, and by suddenly, I mean historically suddenly, that means in a matter of a few decades, some Portuguese sailors started doing this. And this is surprising. I mean, in a matter of a few decades, some men that only had those ancient techniques started to do something radically different. They started sailing in oceanic, long-range, thousands of miles long, weeks, days out of the side of coast. And this is what some Portuguese sailors and some Spanish sailors did in the second half of the 15th century. We're not talking about the 17th or 18th century. We're talking about the 15th century and the beginning of the 16th century. This is so surprising that, I mean, it has so many consequences, but let's forget about the consequences. This is so surprising that historians of science have looked very carefully into this. Just take a look at this voyage. Compare the absolute change in scale. It is truly amazing. If something happened here was a cumulative process of continuous innovation going on. And this I will talk about later. What type of innovation and how did it proceed? Just take a look at this voyage, 1519. This is a very famous Magellan voyage. Take a look at the Mediterranean. Now take a look at the voyage of Magellan a few decades afterwards. What happened that made this possible? And what I will try to show, it was the concourse of many, many types of innovation that turned out correctly. Now, one of the things that we know is that technology had to evolve, shipbuilding techniques had to change, instruments and new techniques have to be used. This is very well known. It has been very well studied. These are some of the instruments that to be put on board because the techniques to sail completely changed. You know, astronomical navigation came into play, etc. But there are things that I would like to point. First, most of these instruments were known. They were adapted. So you can have crucial innovation you don't need to have strict invention. You can just have bright adaptation. It is even more surprising than that. Sometimes innovation was simplification. Just take a look. The nautical astrolabe, this one here, which was the key instrument for long-distance sailing, it is a simplification, a radical simplification of a much, much more sophisticated planispheric, medieval, Latin and Arabic astrolabe. So the innovation here was a judicious and quite radical process of simplification, very direct simplification. So now ideas start to come when you look at history and start to see, well, there's quite a few things going on here. I did not mention, but the first condition, of course, to have any type of innovation is that you have a challenge. Nobody, just innovates out of thin air or in an abstract way. You need to have a challenge, and there was, of course, a challenge here. But there was quite more to say about this. Now, picture this problem. You have to change the techniques, you have to change the instruments, but now you deal with some technicians, sailors, you can make the parallel with many farmers, who have low levels of scholarship, of learning. They did not go to school for many years. How do you train them? How do you do? Well, one of the things that you have to do, you have to devise a new type of language. And this is something that we know very well. These funny guys here, these are some diagrams. So diagrams, visual aids, and all sorts of new visual displays of information were invented in order to solve communication problems, so that you could have people with low levels of education using high-level techniques. So if you have this type of scenario, be advised that history tells you that the language and communication problem is critical to the innovation question. Now, the most spectacular of all of these new visual aids were nautical charts. I'm just showing this one because it's beautiful. I'm not going to comment. It is a very complex object, and it would take one semester, which you don't have, to explain in full detail what's going on there. But at the bottom, it is a problem of conveying information in the way that makes your innovation efficient. That's what a nautical chart is all about. So I insist on the topic of information because history repeatedly shows us this. This very innocent-looking piece of manuscript there, it is an exceedingly important document for Portuguese history. This is a copy of the instructions that every pilot received upon leaving Lisbon for a long oceanic voyages. These were very well standardized. Pilots were instructed to every day collect the following information: latitude, ship's position, wind direction, current, magnetic variation, all the animals that they saw, all plants, all meteorological events, correct maps that they were using if they were not, precise, etc., etc., etc. It was all regulated in this set of instructions. All of this information had to be kept. Here is a ship's logbook. Everybody knows that ships have logbooks, but logbooks are a consequence of long-distance navigation. If you do, point-to-point navigation, you really don't need logbooks. But if you do long-distance navigation, then you need to control this information. We have hundreds of these documents. We can do beautiful things. We can reconstruct day by day, this is what I'm doing here, day by day some of these voyages because they are so precise and the loads of information there are truly staggering. But the most interesting part is the following. After every voyage, the logbooks had to be handed back to expert personnel. So all the information from each voyage was afterwards reanalyzed by top-level experts, cosmographers, mathematicians, etc. And this is also instructed specifically. It was not by chance. Where was this happening? This was happening at specific institutions. So institutions were devised, were created in order to coordinate the flow of information, technical information that was going on, instrument qualification, and all of this knowledge. And in Portugal, the institution known was this, warehouse of Indian Guinea. But in Spain, the same institution, you could see it. It was the Casa de la Contratación, very famous. But there were specific places for this. So now you realize that all the technical, procedures, innovation that were going on were into a loop of accumulated knowledge. And this also teaches us something. So I'm reaching my final 10 minutes. Let's try to wrap up from this sole example. What can we say? Can we learn anything from history? Well, this is a big question, but let's leave it aside for historians to discuss. Let's accept that we can learn something from history. Well, innovation. First of all, of course, innovation has to do with facing challenges. If you don't feel that you have a challenge, I'm sorry to say, you will innovate nothing. Huh? Secondly, innovation, yes, indeed, it has to do with technological advances. This is obvious. But it is very far from the whole story. And if I may add something, sometimes I think people fail a little bit here because they think that a single instrument or technique or new procedure can just by itself change things. It will never change things just by itself. You need that the processes also are completely modernized. You need that the language and the communication, also changes and, goes along with the technological change. And you have to be extremely attentive to the process of information management and control. That means that if your process of innovation is to be really deep and of consequence, you will surely have to act at the level of people and institutions. This is what history tells us, and I wish you the best of luck for your next day. Thank you very much.
Okay, so hands up, who would like to be in one of his classes? Yay! Thank you. In a very short time, you have spilled an incredible amount of information. Before I open maybe to one or two questions from the floor, I pick up a critical point and I bring it in relation to what we are all here to discuss. You said near the outset, innovation isn't about just something new always. It's about simplifying or tweaking. Now, in my humble opinion, we live in show-off times, where we want to show off something new, and lots of people want to make money off that something new. And it started with the dot-coms, and it proliferates. So how do we align the two? Are we not quite getting? Is it hampering innovation that we think it needs to be new, or as you said at the end, we misthink it's not the right thought that it has to be one thing. It's within a far bigger sort of holistic ecosystem.
Well, very rapidly. I think we live in a very, mediatic culture. So the incredibly new stuff is what shows up comes up in the newspaper, etc. But this creates a sort of, biased opinion because there's a lot of very good innovation which is not as, radically different, and it really is all about changing what you already have, especially technologies that are already available, and changing and adapting them, like the examples I gave. And I truly think that if you don't have a culture where this is done regularly, you will never have, you know, the radical innovations. And one cannot just, I mean, just, you know, cross your arms and wait for, you know, iPhone 27 to appear, right? And or to, you know, to Apple to do everything. The challenge that we are facing, I mean, you, me, everybody, it has to be this culture, this, you know, état d'esprit, try to, at every point, with what you have, to improve it and better it.
So effectively, I mean, the sort of the, I'm not sure remit's the right word, but one of the things that works very well about Europe is this information sharing. Yeah. The idea of, number one, don't reinvent the wheel. For goodness sake, look outside, see what another member state, see what another region is doing. Number two, get together and talk about it and see exactly that. I think at the end, yesterday, we had the comment, look, sure, there are differences in the complexities in agriculture and rural development across Europe, but fundamentally, there's a lot of the same challenges. So you're effectively reiterating that. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Have a look, tweak, customize. Yeah.
Well, Katrina, you are accepted as my student.
Yay!
You're absolutely right. Information is absolutely critical. And if anyone comes to, you know, speaks to you or tries to lecture you on how to do innovation, and if they don't go to the information part, then ask for your money back. Thank you.
Does anybody have, yes, oh God, you were so waiting through his whole, you're going to, I'm going to be first. Okay, the lady is coming just to your right here. If you can keep it nice and concise and say who you are and hold it here. You should be all right, yeah? No, hang on, they're fiddling at the back there. They're looking panicked, but they're okay. Are we good? Hang on a minute. Okay, go for it.
Hi, thanks for the interesting speech. I'm coming from operational group from Sweden, and I have a question regarding the innovation and competition. So I'm wondering, like, what's your take on when it comes to competitive market and innovation?
Of course, you're absolutely right. I think it is included in the challenge part, because part of the challenge can be just, you know, the competition part of it, I would say. All in all, I mean, I give a very broad, you know, answer because, you know, again, please remind, I'm just an historian of science, so I will not comment on modern stuff, no. But again, I would say competition is very positive in this sense because it, you know, it spurs you. So, and it provides the challenge. So this would be my sole take. Absolutely, yeah.
But can you, if you need to be competitive, can you retain the purity of the end of the need to solve a challenge?
No, I'm so sorry. This was I never spoke about this. Nor idealistic, nor pure, no nothing. No.
Okay.
The story that I told you was about making lots of money. So look, the driving force for maritime expansion was economic profit. Let's be quite honest about this. There were slightly others. You know, we also know, if you look carefully, that you also had some intangible ideals, like, for example, imperial power or religious influence, or many others. This we know, historians have told us this many times. But in the end, the driving force was economic. So I would be a little bit more skeptical about, you know, just innovating out of the sheer joy of innovation, which I think it's okay, you can do it from time to time, but you will not certainly create a culture of innovation, which is, in the end, what we all want and what, obviously, agriculture needs and it's doing, just out of idealistic, you know, objectives, I think.
And do we have a last question? Good. I'm not very good at reading rooms. No, I do though, because it's an important one, which made me laugh at the beginning when you said, and then in the blink of an eye, a few decades, yep. Which historically is the blink of an eye. So it's another question. I looked at sort of what does innovation mean, you know, the purpose, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. What about timing? At the moment, Europe is under pressure. Yeah. The issues in this sector are challenging, and climate change is not something that's hanging around. Yeah. So how does that fit in terms of that timescale for innovating to solve those specific problems?
Okay, so Katrina gives me 10 minutes, and then she makes these difficult questions. then I would need, like about 1 hour, okay, to explain. Of course, there is an historical context for this story, which I completely skipped. In order to understand this story, this is not only about technology. You had to know about demographics, politics, economics, and many other things. Administration, what was going on. And of course, the context for agriculture can, be, an incentive or can hinder in innovation. This is clear. I tried in my story to take all of this out, just out of simplification, but you are absolutely right, because the specific context at each moment can make the need for innovation more and more imperative. And this is obvious, absolutely, yeah. And this is very important for politicians and for policymakers, of course, because you are the people, policymakers that have to read the specific context of the moment and to devise the normative and the legal ways to enhance then the other players so that they can produce. So this is, I think, their obligation.
I think it reinforces the first point you made. If things need to be done at speed and politicians need to see results in order to endorse further funding, in order to get more results, then you need to look outside and share what's already out there. Otherwise, you're lost. Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. It's been an absolute treat, an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Warm round of applause. You may sit here.